What if I told you that the largest central bank in the world, the United States Federal Reserve, has been talking about using Ripple to innovate their payment system since 2014? Well, some of you may not believe me. However, in this video, we have the proof, and we're going to be hearing a number of clips from a St. Louis Fed member that has been talking about the integration of Ripple with the Federal Reserve's system since 2014. And this St. Louis Fed is from the exact same place that Christopher Waller is from. And if we fast forward to present day, just last week, Christopher Waller hosted a Federal Reserve conference that essentially was all about payments and the embrace of new technologies such as distributed ledgers. And to kick this video off, what I want to do is play you a clip of what he has to say about the increasingly woven nature of the cryptocurrency space, the distributed ledger space in today's financial system. And it's very interesting that the same Fed that Waller is from has actually been talking about using Ripple since 2014. And we're going to show you the clips in regards to how they put forwards Ripple can be used. We're also going to show you and recap on a video that we did where we spoke about how the FedNow's faster payment system, their 365 24/7 payment system, actually already leverages Ripple's technology via some of these certified payment providers. There's about 40 something of them. 20 something are either direct or indirect partners with Ripple already. And the very individual that was the executive of the FedNow program, Ken Montgomery, actually went on to become on the advisory board for Ripple themselves. So there's lots of links here. Let's start off with present day and what took place just a week ago with the Fed conference and what Christopher Waller, a Federal Reserve member from the St. Louis Fed, actually has to say about where we are in regards to this technology today.
This is an acknowledgement that distributed ledgers and crypto assets are no longer on the fringes, but are increasingly woven into the fabric of the payment and financial system. Now, before we hear from these innovators, I would like to touch on roles that the Federal Reserve plays to support the private sector. These include serving as a convener to solve coordination problems and operating core payment and settlement infrastructure. We are also looking ahead, conducting hands-on research on tokenization, using smart contracts, and the intersection of AI and payments for use in our own payment systems. We do this to understand the innovation happening within the payment system, as well as to evaluate whether these technologies could provide opportunities to upgrade our own payment infrastructures and to enable us to have deeper conversations with the industry on these new technologies.
So the cryptocurrency space is increasingly in a kind of pinch me, I'm dreaming state, where a lot of the things that I perhaps prophesized were going to take place in the future is currently unfolding. Not just myself, but many of us that were early in the cryptocurrency space. The beautiful thing is there, Chris Waller very much admitted that the Fed are going to adopt this technology. And we're going to show you they've been looking at Ripple for a long time. In fact, they're already working indirectly via their FedNow service providers with them. And one pushback we often get when we talk about Ripple as a company is that they don't specifically mention the asset XRP. Well, how does Ripple conduct this technological innovation and leverage this technology to enable the promises that it gives? It's via the XRP ledger and the asset XRP. Certainly when we talk about on-demand liquidity, solving the issue that is the tens of trillions of dollars in dormant accounts sat around the world to just enable global payments. I mean, Ripple is truly an innovative company that is innovating with distributed ledgers, and the DLT that they're using is, of course, the XRP ledger. On a side note, back in July, we know that Ripple applied for a US national bank charter. The charter would allow the company to settle payments faster and cut costs by bypassing intermediary banks, while also providing a stamp of legitimacy after years of what they claim has been regulatory sidelining. The company is also seeking a Fed master account that would give it access to the Federal Reserve's payment infrastructure and allow it to hold its stablecoin reserves directly with the central bank. Now, during this conference, this is a tape from Eleanor Turret. She said, big news out of the Federal Reserve Payment Innovation Conference this morning. Governor Chris Waller announced the central bank is proposing a new type of limited access master account, or what they call or what he calls a skinny master account for all legally eligible institutions to receive direct access to the Fed's payments rails so they don't have to rely on partner banks. With this setup, they would access all the services of a full master account, like the ability to borrow directly from the Fed. Importantly, every legally eligible entity could get one, and the legal rule for eligibility wouldn't change. Now, if you think about the US's agenda, and I spoke about this a long time ago before Trump was even elected, the US is going to use stable coins to ultimately further dollar dominance and to maintain a kind of global dominance in regards to their position. If Ripple, who are at the frontier of this innovation, certainly within the United States, can get that master account, that would allow them to essentially directly borrow treasuries to issue stable coins. This is unbelievably huge. And this isn't the main topic of the video yet. Just a little segue based on some of the things that came out of the conference that we just heard Christopher Waller introduce there. It goes on to say, essentially, this new master account would allow the Fed to greenlight innovative banks, including fintech, stablecoin issuers, and other payment companies. This is a big deal for companies like Custodian Bank, Caitlin Long's not very popular with the XRP community, and Kraken FX, which have spent years trying to get Fed master accounts, with Custodia even taking the Fed to court. It would also speed up access for companies like Ripple and Anchorage, which applied this year. So pretty huge news, but that's not really what we're here to talk about. We could do a separate video on that entirely, and perhaps we should. Fed is now acknowledging the embrace of this technology, and who is unbelievably well positioned, and who have they been talking about since 2014. Now we're going to play 3 clips from David Andolfatto, who is from the St. Louis Fed back in 2014 and 13, actually talking about the embrace of Ripple and how the Fed could use and utilize it. Ripple is bringing this innovation via the XRP ledger. Let's dive into David Andolfatto, what he has to say, before we explore how the Fed is already integrated with Ripple. And in fact, the guy, the kind of executive over the FedNow project when it launched, actually went on to go and work at Ripple. Let's dive into these clips.
I think probably the most important aspect of this technology revolution is, in my view, the threat of entry into the money and payment system. And what I think it will do is to force traditional institutions, including central banks, to either adapt or die. Let me conclude with a thought about the future of central banking. I don't think that well-run central banks have very much to worry about. I think, in fact, they should welcome this emerging currency competition. Well-run central banks, central banks that are not well-run probably should fear. Of course, I consider the Fed a well-run central bank. There is, in my view, room for beneficial coexistence, and this might take many forms, but here I'm just speculating. One is, we have already this institution, the Fed. We're celebrating our 100th anniversary this year, in fact. It's stood the test of time. It's withstood, there's intense currency competition in the world, and the US dollar is still the king. It has passed the market test for 100 years here. We have a politically independent Fed operating an elastic supply of currency. Remember, I said there's some benefit to that if you can trust the institution to operate it, with a congressionally assigned mandate. So, for example, some notion of price level stability. That's basically what we have in this country. And arguably, it's worked relatively well, although, of course, no payment system is perfect. And then what I can see coexisting alongside this institution is something like a Ripple platform, that currency-agnostic peer-to-peer payment system I just described that facilitates low-cost payments. So, potentially consumers can bypass Western Union, that $10 service fee. That's going to be a thing of the past. With Ripple, you'll be able to send money anywhere in the world for very, very, very low cost. So that's something that could come together, kind of this marriage of, I thought I'd end on a happy note.
That last slide certainly made me smile. And if you look at how Ripple is going or able to facilitate what he's talking about there, it's with XRP. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed with the other 2 clips, then we finish things off with Ken Montgomery, who's now on the advisory board of Ripple. Previously was the sort of executive, the guy overseeing the FedNow system. The opportunity here is that we have largely seen Ripple's price get driven, or XRP price, I should say, get driven by speculation on the future. And that's what markets are. They're a wager on the price of something tomorrow. We are yet to see just what XRP's price does when it is globally integrated into the financial systems and being used every single day at scale, let alone the retail FOMO that is going to be caused on the back end of that, and institutional FOMO that we're seeing via ETFs and now DATs. Evernorth, what a major announcement that was. The interesting thing with Evernorth, what do you think the name means? What direction is north? It's up. Ever up. Very interesting and brilliant name. Let's play the other two clips, and then we're going to finish things off on Ken Montgomery. There's a major opportunity here, ladies and gentlemen. We don't want you guys to miss it.
David, fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
I'm one of the fellows who raised his hand when you asked who uses Ripple, Joe and myself. And I just want to say, it's I'm very happy to see that someone at the St. Louis Fed respects it at the very least. And I'm sure that from all the good things you said about it, many people in this room would like to hear more. But you mentioned that you foresee peer-to-peer currency-agnostic payment clearance systems such as Ripple coexisting with institutions such as central banks in the United States. And my question is, how are we going to see that happen? What is it going to take?
So thank you very much. And, all the nice things I said about Ripple, everybody knows to short it. Well, how do I see it? I mean, like you said, Ripple is a currency-agnostic platform. It really doesn't care too much about creating and managing its money supply, although it does have its native money supply. So, it's doing, the way I exposited the idea, Ripple is handling the processing of payments for many of the world's unbanked people, okay? And that the Fed is one institution that's providing a type of currency that people could use as payment using the Ripple protocol. But there may be other currencies. There could be Bitcoin, there could be the yen. So, I see room for coexistence. I see it today. I don't see any reason to doubt why it might not continue in the future.
People say, how can you trust, the Fed to do the bookkeeping? Like I said, my response is, well, you don't expect the Fed to kind of steal your money. If the Fed can print all the money at once, it's not going to mess around with your bookkeeping. So, we have this big spreadsheet, the blockchain if you want, but it's just managed by the Fed, and it's very cheap, much cheaper than Bitcoin, if you're willing to delegate the responsibility to a third party. But then the downsides to all of that, of course, is you'd actually, suppose you didn't want the Fed to be responsible for processing the payments. Suppose, the Fed will likely impose some KYC restrictions on some purchases. They might not process some purchases that you might want to undertake. And so it was at that point that I said, well, we could, if we wanted to, extend the concept one step further. I'm not saying that this is ever going to happen, but just conceptually, you could imagine not FedWire for all, but kind of like a Fed coin, where what the Fed would do is actually just issue these, Bitcoin-like objects, but and they would enforce a par exchange rate with the U.S. dollar. That would eliminate the exchange rate volatility. But they could delegate the clearing of these payments to some third party, some sort of Ripple-like protocol.
We just spoke about the Fed allowing Ripple to get a kind of account directly with them and to be able to essentially borrow Federal Reserve issued debt to essentially enable a kind of Fed coin. They're now called stable coins. Obviously, we've moved on from when David Andolfini was talking that to sort of then go ahead and process the domestic side of things, but also actually solve the entire problem of cross-border payments. XRP, if you think about it, is akin to the technology like a kind of Facebook Messenger or some of these messengers that allow messages to be sent in this kind of cross-border, free, without borders globally anytime. XRP is kind of that. It's the platform upon which that can be done for money, and that's huge, and it solves a hell of a lot of issues with the legacy banking system. In all of that, I believe the first clip that I played you, he actually had David. I said that Chris that we spoke about at the start from the Fed, Chris Waller, he's from the same Fed that David's from. They've been talking about this since 2014. He was actually sat next to David in that first clip. And this is huge. What I want to kind of do now is just show you further links to the Fed and how the Fed is already kind of indirectly using and partnered with Ripple. This is the FedNow's instant payment system, 24/7, 365. This is from Ken Montgomery, who's the FedNow's program executive. Ken Montgomery is the program executive of the FedNow service, a new round-the-clock instant payment service that the Federal Reserve launched in July. Our technological approach for the FedNow service is driven by security, performance, and resilience, 3 pillars that are at the center of every technological decision we make. To help us achieve those objectives, the FedNow service uses distributed ledger technology, machine learning, and cloud-first designs. What DLTs do they use? Well, if we take a look at that in just a second, this is the sort of FedNow service providers. If we throw this up, actually many of these, we've done a video on it specifically, are direct or indirect partners with Ripple. And also, very interestingly, Ken Montgomery, here he is on the advisory board of Ripple. So the Fed has been talking openly about using Ripple since 2014. If you fast forward today, we're at a stage where the Fed is acknowledging that they're going to embrace distributed ledger technology in their own infrastructure stack. They're already doing that with the FedNow that has lots of links to Ripple. And ultimately, Ripple is in this just sensational position. And Ripple can only enable this technological unlock via the XRP ledger and thus XRP. It is a bright future that we have ahead of us, ladies and gentlemen, and we want everybody to be on the ball with that future. That's it from me, guys. I'm going to love and leave you. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section, and I'll see you all in the next one.